Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to create an assembly drawing in Rhino 8. This is great for people who want to show an assembly system of their entire design from whole to part or from part to whole. So this is great for exploded axonometrics or expressing assembly or tectonics of structure and other elements of your own design. So we can take something that looks like this, and mind you, this is still all in Rhino, right? And I'll show you how to create this display style with this hatch style of like wood grain and concrete in the background. And so we can take this actual drawing here and we can make it look like this, where it's an exploded axonometric, again, all in Rhino. And so you can extract many drawings from this one design that you have. So instead of recreating multiple drawings, you can use your one model to create maybe 6 or 7 or as many details as you like. So for example, this is like a post detail that's exploded, showing the beam and the post and the cross beams and the purlins for the roof and all the fastening connections. And this exact same drawing, we can go in and we can show like the base foundation detail, for example, like down here. See? So this is all one drawing. And I'm going to show you how to do this from start to finish, and it's actually very easy. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first step that we want to establish is creating our display style. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically using this black and white or this like grayish tone for my wood grain and for my wood hatch. And you can use actual hatches in Rhino, but I'm actually using these swatches or these hatches as a material instead. So the first thing I want to show you is how to create these types of materials and then bring them into Rhino. And then I'll show you how to actually use them as a material in Rhino and edit the display style to get it looking like this. So for example, in Photoshop, right, I have this swatch here. Okay, this is just a seamless wood hatch. And your wood hatches actually do not have to be seamless for this display style because we're going to stretch the wood grain as much as possible. So it actually doesn't have to be seamless. It's safer for it to be seamless, but it doesn't have to be for your wood grain, to be honest, or actually for any of the hatches for this display style. It is better though, it's more on the safe end for your swatches to be seamless, but it's okay if they're not for this specific display style. Just want to emphasize that. So we have this typical wood grain I guess hatch or a texture that you would call it, right? And what we can do to it, I make some slight modifications to it in Photoshop just to give it a specific type of hue and look. And the first thing I do is I make it black and white, right? Just the black and white adjustment down here. You go here and just do the black and white adjustment if you like. You can also do hue and saturation. The next one is my levels, okay? So I actually want to push my highlights and my lowlights. So if I go to my levels adjustment, I just want to push my highlights and my lowlights almost next to the midtones or the neutrals. You see this little gray triangle over here? I want to push them all towards the center. So it starts to feel more like a hatch or like more like a drawing. Okay. And then the next one is I want to bump up my brightness and contrast. If you go here, you see I really bump up my brightness and contrast. And you can play around with this. Like maybe, you know, this is a little too blown out for you. You can bring down your contrast. You know, if it's a little too blown out, you can bring down the brightness as well. Okay. The reason why I have it a little bit bright is I don't want it to be too overwhelming of a hatch. All right. So it's basically these 3 adjustments that I do to like any wood grain hatch that I do. So like this wood grain has a lot of character to it. And, you know, there's certain wood grains that, depending on the cut, like for example, you can find like a rift cut wood grain. A rift cut wood grain is going to have less character and it's going to be more uniform because it's just striations. You can do a quarter sawn. A quarter sawn is like in between a rift and a plain sawn. So you are going to have some like cathedraling of wood grain. So like these are good search terms for your texture. Like if you want a wood grain that's like quarter sawn wood texture or rift sawn wood texture or like plain sawn wood texture. Okay. So a plain sawn wood texture is going to have way more character. It's going to have way more cathedraling and lots of rings and lots of grains to it. Okay. So it's really up to you in terms of what type of wood texture you want to use. But in general, you want to use these 3 adjustments just to make it feel more like a drawing and like more like a line hatch. Okay. So that's the one thing that I always do when I have this type of display style. Now, after I finish this, I save this as a JPEG. So I do like Control Alt Shift S to save for web, right? And it'll reduce the file size substantially. I do it like on maximum or in high quality, and I do just save it as a JPEG. You can save it as a PNG to be on the safe side, because PNG is a lossless file. So if you keep resaving it, it's not going to ruin the quality of the file. But I'm just going to use this file once, and I'm going to save it just once. So I do save for web, and I just save it as a JPEG, or you can save it as a PNG. You have an option to save it as PNG if you like, and I just do save. Okay, and that's my basically my method for like all of my wood grain hatches. I do this for all wood grains if I want like that black and white hatch style display style. Okay, now if you want to create your own display style hatch, you can do it in Illustrator very easily. So let me go to Illustrator. So for example, in here you notice like I literally just drew this in Illustrator. Like I literally just drew circles and triangles in Illustrator for like my concrete hatch, you know? If this is looking like a little too fun because of the circles, you can get rid of the circles, for example, and do more of a hatch that looks like this, you know? This is just triangles and lines and like smaller lines. So you can do like a concrete hatch that looks like that if you like, or if you want the circles in there, you can also do that. You know, this might look a little cartoonish depending on the line weight. I actually like the circles, just it makes it feel more dense. But all you'll do is literally just make like a little tiny, this is like less than a quarter of an inch, right? And I'll just do a little swatch like this. I take it and I group it, and then I go to my swatches over here. Excuse me, if I over here, my swatches. You go to your swatches tab, and you can literally take this and you can drag it into your swatches, and then Illustrator will turn it into a pattern for you. Okay, so if you click on the swatch that just uploads for you up there, you can go in and then it'll become a swatch for you like that. You see? And what you can do is you can actually go in and edit this swatch if you like. So for example, like if you notice there's a lot of like white space here, right? A lot of white space here. If you double click on that swatch, it'll allow you to adjust how you want to, you know, maybe you want to populate the swatch a little more, right? So like maybe you move that there, you see how it moves everything with you, right? Maybe you want to take this one and you want to copy it down here just to fill up some space, right? Maybe you want to take this line and put it right there, right? You would take this little circle, put it here just to fill up space. You know, maybe I'll take this little circle at this corner right here, and let me go here, maybe take this circle here and put it right here, maybe like that. You see how you start to fill up space now? And once you like it, you can just do close it and you can do done, right? And so that becomes that swatch like there. So this, like, if you want to do the hatch in Illustrator, you can keep it just in Illustrator. But then what I like to do is I like to take the swatch that I make like this, right? And I just do Control C, and I just go back into Photoshop and I just paste it into Photoshop, you know? So I'll do like file paste. I make sure it's like 300 DPI. So if I look at this image size here, right? It's basically half inch, 300 pixel resolution, right? And I just paste it as a smart object, and then I rasterize the layer. That's what I basically do. And then I have this as a hatch that I can use now as my concrete hatch or as my concrete material in Rhino. And then I just, same thing, file, save for web, or just Control Alt Shift S, then save for web. And see, this is my little hatch. You know, you can do JPEG, PNG, white background, and you just save it. So you'll just do that for all of the hatches that you want to do, or for all the swatches that you want to do, like whether it's an image texture, okay? The reason why I do an Illustrator is so that I just get a good sample and a good feel, right, of how it's going to look. That's all. That's the reason why I do an Illustrator, just to test it out. But you could like use this on an Illustrator drawing, like for example, if you do make 2D, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. It's really easy to make patterns in Illustrator. Okay, so once you have your swatches established, you're going to go into Rhino, and then you're going to make it a material. So that's the next thing I'm going to show you. Okay, so here we are in Rhino, and everything you see here is a material. It's not a hatch, even though it looks like a hatch, okay? So this is a material right here. This wood grain is a material. This is a concrete hatch that's used as a material, okay? So let me just get out of parallel view, make it perspective, just a little bit easier. Right? Let's go in here. Okay. So remember how I said, don't worry if it's not seamless? Because you see what we're doing is I'm literally taking this and I'm just stretching it all the way across the geometry. Because this type of drawing, first off, if you're viewing it from, like, for example, let's say you do an aerial, right? And then you get closer, and then you get closer, and then you get closer, right? You're not really going to notice the grain repeating or being overly stretched, right? So that's why it's okay if you kind of stretch your hatches out on your material mapping, for example, right? The whole point of this drawing is so that you can extract many drawings from one drawing, okay? So that's the whole point of this. And that's why I don't mind that I see a lot of repetition here, because you'll never notice it, in my opinion, you know, unless you stare at it for like 5 minutes straight. Okay, so what I want to show you now is actually how to create this material. So for example, we see here, this is my post, right? So I do have a layer called post. And on my layer, I assigned it a material over here. Let me just, right here, I assigned it a material right here, right? So if I click on this circle, so the first thing that you're going to do, right, is that you're going to create a custom new material, right? So you'll go up here and you'll click on this plus sign here and you'll do custom and you'll click on custom, okay? Right? And you're going to give it a name. And you're going to call it like wood hatch, okay? And then the next thing you're going to do is right here, it says color to add texture. You're going to click on your folder icon and you're going to upload wherever you saved that swatch. Remember from Photoshop where you save it as a JPEG or as a PNG? You're going to click on this folder icon and you're going to just upload it, right? You'll go in here and find the actual swatch that you like and you'll upload it on there, okay? That's what you'll do, right? And then once you do that, you click open and it'll upload on there. I'm going to switch over to the actual one. Okay, so same thing, right? So once you have it uploaded, okay, there's two settings that I want you to pay attention to. Number one is that I give all of my material a slight transparency. So I give it like a 20% transparency to it. So that's slightly see-through. Because I'm creating an assembly drawing, I want to be able to see through and see like slight details of the connections. You know, maybe it's like a mortise or a tenon or a dovetail, or maybe some type of like, you know, Japanese dovetailing or some type of Japanese mortise connection, right? So you want to be able to show what's actually happening, maybe with like fasteners and anchor bolts, right? Or plates and connection plates, for example. So that's why I give this a slight transparency, so you can see slightly what's going on tectonically with your architectural structure and the actual structural members itself, okay? That's number one. Number two is that the actual material itself, I fade it. I give it a slight transparency as well. So you see here, I give it like an 80%, I guess, opacity, okay? So what that does is that it fades the material a little bit. If you make it 100%, it's going to be like a stark black and white hatch style. And if you like that, that's fine. But sometimes it gets a little too harsh. So that's why I bring this down. And you can literally just click on it and you can drag, right? You see how it just faded right now? You see that? If I do 100, let me show you. You see it gets much darker, right? If I bring it down, it gets much lighter. So I do like around 80. You can also double click and type in, right? And so that's all you do for the materials. And I do that for all of them. Same thing for this like concrete hash, the exact same method. I create, you know, a new material, custom, call it concrete hatch, give it a slight transparency, and you just click OK, right? So let me just zoom in a bit so you understand why I give it like a slight transparency. So if you see, if I go in here, you see that like I can see, let me just type in the actual view. You see like I can see like the bolts going in a little bit, right? I want to be able to see that. I want to see like this slight methodology of connection of my architectural structure, okay? So that's why I give it that 20% transparency, and then why I fade the material 80%. You see how the material is like kind of gray? That's why I do that 80%, okay? So if I also go down to here for my base plate connection, right? So like this is like a steel plate, a steel T-plate that embeds into the wood post, right? And that'll anchor through. So it's kind of showing you what's going on here, right? And then, you know, you have your other base plate that anchors through, and I'll show you the actual exploded axonometric later. And then, you know, this is my concrete hatch, you know? So that's basically it as a material and how you do it in Rhino, okay? That's all. Now, going back to the materials, I want to show you how to map your materials, because this is very important, right? How do you map your actual materials? So if I do, for example, let me just make a box, right? Let me just make a box like this, go down. Okay, so that's my material. Let me just pull it up out of the ground. Okay, and let me just do match properties, right? And I want to modify that, and I want to match it to this. Let's do okay. So you see here how it has the wood grain, right? You can see the grain. You can see, again, this is all stretched out. This is because it's matching the mapping, okay? So for me to adjust my mapping, you click on your geometry or your object, and you go to your actual properties here, and you'll see like this checkered symbol, okay? And so you can do different types of mapping. Right now, I have this as box mapping. So if you see up here, you have these different types of mapping profiles like planar, UV, surface, box, spherical, cylindrical. You can do different types of mapping. I just want to show you what happens when I remove this mapping and it's default. So if I click on this X, I can remove mapping. So you see how like each one is going in its own direction, right? Let me get out of parallel projection because that can be confusing sometimes in our perspective. And let me click on this, ZS, zoom selected. Okay, so do you see how things are all going like in weird directions, right? I don't want that, right? So that's why I want to map this material, okay? You can modify it a couple ways. You can, for example, rotate the XYZ plane so that they all are following a specific orientation. That's one way. The faster way is to just do box mapping, right? And literally this is like a rectangular object, and I basically just do all of the default settings, okay? I don't want to make this too complicated, but I want to do a bounding box. I want it to follow the C plane, like the actual C plane, which is the same as the world, by the way. So I'll press enter. And do I want to cap it? Yes. Like I want to wrap it all the way around. So enter. So there you go. You see? So now I have this, and see it's like way more fine, right? It's way more fine. And you see how it's like wrapping, right? Like this bends and turns. That's what the mapping does for you, okay? And you see how all of these are going in the same orientation? Like the vertical grains are all going in the same orientation. That's why we do mapping, okay? And so in the mapping, you can adjust sizes of things. You can like make the X wider, right? Or you can make both of these the same. Like I can make these, for example, 1 and 1, you see? Or I can make it like 0.5, 0.5 if I want to. 0.5 and 0.5, you see? And I can lock these ratios. So I can lock these. And then if I slide them, they all slide together. You see? And so if you notice, do you see how when I make my Z bigger, it stretches it out in the Z direction too, right? So it's really up to you how you want to do this. Like if I rotated it, this XYZ will change as well. So if I rotate this 90, if I rotate this 90 degrees, you see now like depending how I adjust this, right? I mean, I'll check this. If I stretch it out in certain orientations, it's going to look a little bit different. So if I took the Y, for example, you see how that gets wider in this orientation now? You see that? Because I'm adjusting the Y perpendicular to the Y axis. This is the X axis, okay? So that if I adjust the X axis, I'll show you. You see? Let me do this. So this is the Y axis right here. It's going to adjust any material that's perpendicular to the Y, okay? The X one, it's going to adjust any material perpendicular to the X in this orientation. And then the Z is going to adjust any material perpendicular to the Z axis, right? That's what it's basically doing, okay? So that's why you see them stretching in very specific orientations when I do that, okay? So like maybe you like how the grain is, right? Like you like how the grain is for both of these. Maybe you want both of these to be the same, like 0.5 and 0.5, right? But let's say you want this really stretched out. So you see how it's stretching now? It's really stretched out. You're stretching the material so the grain becomes like more fine. Or maybe you're like, no, I don't like it because I can't really read the ring, right? I can't really read the knots of the wood. I want to read more of the knots of the wood, so I'll bring it in some more then, you know? But then you might get more repetition, you see? So that's like very repetitive, you see? And you can also rotate your profiles as well. Like you can rotate all of these. Like you see the end right here? Like maybe you don't like this, you know, maybe you want it rotated the other way, right? So you can play around. So for example, this is my X, it's going to rotate. So if I take this, you see how it starts to rotate? So you want to play around with these angles to see how you want to show your grains, for example, like what direction you want to show your grains, okay? Like you see that, like that doesn't make any sense in terms of wood. That makes zero sense because, you know, if you're going to have a beam, you're not going to, just structurally speaking, you would never have your wood grain like this, you know? You want it so that the wood grain is almost, the horizontals are on the right side because they're acting as like little compressive members of the actual wood grain itself. So you would never have your grain going this way for like a beam, for example, right? Like you would actually have your wood grain going like that, because just structurally speaking, you know, the load hitting down on here, right? You want these wood grains actually act as, these fibers act as like a structural member in a way. That's a different description. Same thing Z. So I take my Z like that, you see? So that'll rotate this in a specific orientation if you want, right? Or you could do 45 if you like. You see? So, and you can also change the repetition of this if you like. So for example, if you want to keep this the same size, you can increase the density of this by increasing the repetition of the pattern. So if I do 2, it'll become more dense. You see? 2, more dense. Right? 2, more dense. It won't do it in every orientation because it just won't make sense, right? But you see here how it gets even more repetitive because you're increasing the density of the pattern. This one is the size of your pattern. So think of this as taking that one swatch, right? And you're saying how big you want to make it, like how big you want to stretch it across this geometry. That's what this setting's for. This setting is saying how many times do you want to repeat that swatch on a geometry. That's where seamless materials come into play. Okay. But then again, because on my Z, I'm going to stretch it across the entire geometry, it doesn't really bother me, right? And even if it looks repetitive, it doesn't matter because I'm always going to be zooming in, okay? So that's an important thing to understand, all right? The next step is the display style, okay? So how we can actually make Rhino look like this as a display style, because you can't just like switch to rendered view and you're done. You have to adjust your style a little bit so that Rhino can adjust the surface edges, materials, lighting, and stuff like that, okay? So that's the next thing I'm going to show you. What you're going to do is you're going to type in options, and you're going to go down to where it says view. Right here, view. And then you're going to go and you're going to click on display modes, and you're going to go to rendered, right? You're going to click on rendered, and you're going to make a copy of rendered and give it a name. Like I'm calling mine, I think like rendered drawing fill, I think, right? You're going to click rendered drawing, give it a name, and then you click OK. I already have the settings, but you'll click OK. All right. So once you click OK, you'll actually close out of this, and then you're going to, on your display style over here, right here, right? You're going to go here and drop down and then assign that actual view you just made, because you want to see your updates live. So that's why you make that active. Then you go back and type options. And, you'll go down back to view. Let me just highlight this for you. You go view, display modes, and just scroll down until you find your display style that you created, right? So mine rendered layer color, I think it's called the rendered material fill, excuse me. It's rendered material fill, all right? So in here, I'm just going to start showing you all of the settings that I do, okay? So number one is I make my background a solid white, right? Ground plane on, that's really up to you if you want to have your ground plane on or not. Right now, I do not have mine on, right? If you have yours on, then there's going to be an actual ground plane at the 0, point that cuts everything off, okay? So I do not have mine on at the moment, but it's okay if you do. For shading settings, I have shade objects on, and then I have use rendering material, okay? So on the drop down, you'll do rendering material. Backface setting, also rendering material, okay? Now, if we scroll down here, you notice I don't have that many things checked on here. All I have is show surface edges, show curves. I would also do, like, if you want to annotate on here or do text, I would do show text and show annotations. Okay. Yeah. And show clipping planes if you want to show like a section style. Okay. Everything else I have turned off. All right. So those are the only ones that I have on right now. Okay. So that's just one important thing to keep in mind. You can, if you want to, you can do show mesh wires if you like. You can do that if you like. If you have like blocks that are meshes, you can do show mesh wires if you want to do that. So this is optional, the show mesh wires, okay? Now, if I scroll down for scene lighting, I'm doing scene lighting right? But that's really up to you if you want to do scene lighting or not. It's not that important, to be honest, because I'm going to turn off my shadows for this type of display style. There's going to be no shadows at all. It's just going to be like pure line drawing with no shadows. But you can just have it as scene lighting or even ambient color if you like. So it's really your choice. Right now, I have it as scene lighting, okay? So next thing you do is you go to your objects over here, okay? So on your objects, some important things. So for objects, I'm saying use objects color, and I'm also saying use objects width, okay? What use objects color means is that it's going to use my layer color that I assign it, okay? So that's an important thing to understand. I'm using my layer color here. And then curve width usage is the actual width usage in my layer property. So like if I pan to the right, I'm not going to do it right now, but if you pan to the right on your layers, you know, you can give like your line type width. So by default, it's like default or hairline, which is really thin. You can, if you don't want to do that, or if you don't have those settings because you're like on Rhino 7, you can do pixels and just give it like a pixel of 1. Okay. If you don't have those settings because of the version of Rhino you're on, you can give it like a pixel of 1. Okay. But if you see width, you can give a pixel of 1. But if you have Rhino 8 or above, you can do use objects width and it'll use a default line type. Okay. So I typically do use objects width for my curve. Just important item to understand is that when you do that, you should only have the curves that you actually want to show. So that means you should hide all of your construction lines that you use to build your 3D model with, and only have the curves you actually want to show in your model or your design. Okay. Next one is your surfaces. Okay. So for surfaces, for surface edge settings, depending like on how big you want to make this, like how much you want the lines to pop, you can do pixels and give it a wider width. So like right now, I'm actually doing pixels for this and I'm giving it a wider width for my surface edges. You play around with this. Maybe you just want to stick to 1 and make everything just a thin line around, right? But I'm giving things like a 2 just to make it just a little bit thicker, just a little bit more legible, right? And then I'm giving everything, you see, I'm saying use a single color for all edges. So I'm making all of my edges black, basically, okay? That's what I'm doing, right? I should technically, for my naked edges, also make this black. I don't know why it's gray. Just make it black. But I would make that black as well. And objects width, I'm doing objects width. You can also do pixels if you like. So again, objects width is your layer line type settings. If you want to do that route, pixels is just like a fixed number. So I'm doing pixels of 2. So that's why it's like a little bit thicker on the edges. Okay. Now, if you have meshes, you notice for my meshes here, I have everything as use single color for all naked edges or objects, like mesh settings, mesh edge settings, mesh naked edge settings, manifold edge settings, and I all just have an edge thickness of 1. If it gets a little overwhelming, you can make the black like a dark gray instead of a black. But guaranteed, when you export this view, it's going to look very thin anyway. Okay. Now, for shadows, I have my shadows turned off. Okay. So you see, I don't have this checked. My shadows are turned off. I don't want any shadows on you. I just want it to be a flat, or I guess it's not flat, but it's not like a shaded drawing. It's a hatched drawing, for example. So all edges have the same, I guess, lighting on it. Okay. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. You can have your shadows on if you want, but in my opinion, when you have assembly drawings that are more on the technical end, I don't want to see shadows. You know, it's more about assembly and how things come together. Right. Clipping plane is your choice. I'm not really using clipping planes on here, but if I did, I would have show fills and show edges as the same color, so it has more of a poche look to it. Okay, that's what I do. So if you do show fills, I would make that a solid color and make it like black or orange or whatever color you like, and then show edges the same color as your fill. And you don't need to give it a thickness because it's gonna have a poche look to it anyway. It's gonna look like one filled color. So that's if you do it. And here I don't have any of that because this is more of like an exploded axonometric showing how parts and pieces come together. Okay. So once you have all of that, you're basically done with your display style. Okay. And then all you have to do is just plan out your views, right? So like, for example, the way that I did it, let me just zoom out. I have something like AX1, right? That's like more zoomed out aerial. I have a lot of layers turned off, by the way, just to save memory because this is a very big file. But like I had like a zoomed out version of this, right? And then I do AX2. It's a little bit more zoomed in. AX3, it's a little bit more zoomed in. AX4 thing's the same. AX5 is like the post detail. Right. And so that's how I line up and set up my views for like more of the assembled view, like, you know, not the exploded view, just how everything are assembled. And the reason why I do that is because it gives you like a story. There's like a story to this, right? I'm taking you zoomed out and I'm zooming in more and more, right? And I'm going into like more details basically. So I think that this type of narrative of, I guess, tectonics of architecture is really powerful if you're really trying to convey to maybe your studio or maybe to a client how you're taking things from a overall design aerial view perspective down to the actual detail connections, right? And so the way that you save your views, right? So like, for example, I always have my views for this. I always have it in parallel projection. That's number one. So on my projection, I have it as parallel. And then I'll like type in named view. I'll type in named view. And I like to call my axon views like AX1, AX2, AX3. If you look here, I have AX for axon, AX1, AX2, AX3. The reason why I do that is because it's easier for me to just type in my views instead of always clicking. Like if I orbit by mistake, I can do AX1, right? AX3, AX5, right? So that's an important thing to understand, right? When I'm saving my views. So I want to go over here and I want to show you an exploded assembly. This is literally taken from the same model. I'm just pulling members up, pulling members out, extending certain members. Let me just go back here just to prove it to you. Like I even have, if I zoom in on here, I have all of my bolts in here. You see? They're all in there. You see? And by the way, I got this from 3D Warehouse and I just typed in bolts, bolts with fasteners, or you can say bolts and fasteners, for example, or like hex bolts, right? So this model is fully made, right? And you can make it a block if you like. Like, so for example, in my post detail, I made this little post detail a block so that if I ever need to modify it, I can go ahead and modify it. Okay. And I have a lot of layers turned off just because of memory, but everything is in here. So if I don't want to turn on my roof layer, but I have a lot of things on this roof layer right now that's turned off, and you'll see it in the assembly drawing. But I just wanted to show you that everything is actually assembled from one drawing. So let me go back here. So if you go here, right, I have basically like my purlins right here on the roof, like this bow roof right here, right? I have the purlins there. Now, remember how I said display curves, you see? So these are my curves. See, when I do curves, it's because I actually want to show these curves. You should not have any curves on here that you don't want to show. All right, that's very important. So if before you do that, what I like to do is I do cell curve, right? And I'll sell all the curves and I'll hide them. And then I will only generate the curves that I want to show. Okay, that's very important to understand because it can get really messy if you have all these curves, like, you know, your construction curves, and that was just used to model. It's not used for display. What I'm showing here, all these curves are for display. So like I'm showing how these actual fasteners explode out because it actually connects into here. And I actually just found a mistake. This, oh, I guess you can't tell, but there's actually a mistake in here. You should see a hole there. You know, you see, I'm using these lines here to show, you know, just guiding where things are aligned, right? So like this right here notches in to this cross beam, which is then fastened through. So again, I should have had holes here because it's actually fastening through here. That's a silly mistake from my end, but I'm using these curves intentionally, right? I'm using all this intentional. And again, like I said, I got all these from 3D Warehouse, like these actual fasteners on 3D Warehouse. So in here, like for example, for my curve, right? And I have this on a layer called like annotation layer. On my properties, I'm just giving it, you know, a line type hidden, right? That's all. And you can change the scale if you want it to be more dashed or less dashed. I will say though that these dash lines only will appear in this display style when you are in parallel view. If you're in perspective, sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you won't. So make sure your projection is always like in parallel view, okay? So again, you know, you see how like I'm showing certain things, like I cut off the purlins. So like in reality, the purlins go all the way across. Okay. But in this one, I don't need that because I already showed that information earlier. In this one, I just want to show, you know, really this relationship to this relationship and this relationship to here, to there, and how these purlins are connected to the main like bow beams. Okay. And again, I'll go down here, the same thing. You see, this is exploded. Right? So these are like my anchor bolts will go down to the anchor plate, and anchor plate will, connect down to the foundation, which is underneath here. And this slots into the actual wood post. And then these go into the actual timber post here, right? So, these are really great to like produce drawings all from the same model quite quickly, right? And again, all of my views are at the same viewing angle because I want these to line up. So this view lines up with this view, right? Like in terms of like, it's not like I captured this view at this angle and then when I went down to the posts, right, I captured it at a different angle. I didn't do that. Like I didn't capture this at that angle and then the top post is like at this angle. No, they're all at the same viewing angle, just like panned up and panned down. That's all. Okay, so keep that in mind because you want things to line up perfectly, right? Now, the last two things that I do in Rhino before I export it, I'll do print display. And I always have my state on because that just gives, that'll make my lines look like how I want them to look. And then for color, I'll do display, right? That just gives you, just makes it a little bit more accurate in terms of representation, right? And then the last thing I'll do is that I'll do view capture to file, right? And it's up to you if you do transparent background. Resolution, I always start with a viewport, right? And then I do custom, and then I bump up the size. So I'm on a 4K, but I'll still just do like 4,000, right? And then I'll even bump up the scale by 2 times just to make the line weights read better. Because when you bump up the scale, it will increase the whole scale of the drawing. So the line weights might read, it'll read crisper and thinner, but it'll be more clean when you always increase your scale. And then you click OK, and then I typically save this as a PNG. So when you click OK, so it'll give you a file save dialog, and I just save it as a PNG. That's what I save it as, right? So go here, I do file save as a PNG. That's all. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you is how I lay it out in InDesign. For example, like for a studio presentation, like final studio presentation, or maybe for a competition, or maybe for a client presentation, right? Let them understand how things come together for their design or for their space. So here we are in InDesign, and I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of typos on here. But you see, like I first start out, right? I first start out with just a typical aerial view, okay? Again, all the same viewing angle. Then I go down and I show a zoomed in portion. So I even show this like detail here, right? I go in and I show this zoomed in. To be like very consistent, I would actually make this the same proportion of your actual like viewing frame, like this like little viewing frame. I'll make the same proportion as that. So going in here and I have this here, right? Showing more zoom in. So this is like a polycarbonate roof, overlaid with that, right? And I go down and it's even a more zoomed in view, you see, with the purlins on top. And then I go down and it's even though I take the roof off and it's even a more zoomed in view. Again, this is all the same drawing. And I go down and I show the post detail, you see? So, and you see how this lines up? They all line up. So there's like one drawing that lines up that keeps lining up, okay? And then that same Rhino file, or you can like save that as a new Rhino file. I do an exploded Axonometric, right? And I'm not taking this to Illustrator. I'm not doing any line weights anywhere. I literally take a screenshot in Rhino and I put it into InDesign and I'm basically done because I have it saved. And then, this is where I have my labels. Again, I probably have like a bunch of typos on these labels, so please ignore them. But on my labels here, I just have, things like, and you see, I have this going in the same orientation as my Axonometric. And the way that I do that is if you see up here, let me show you. I have my shear angle and my rotation angle the same, okay? So like on my text, what you're gonna do is like, for example, on your text, you'll take like your regular text and you'll like rotate it until like lines up, to this actual text. So let me just do a test so you understand. Let me just take this, let me copy this text, make a new text here and just paste it, okay? Like, so let's say we have this text here, right? Like this, okay? So what you'll do, right, is I will first match this angle. I'll just press E, rotate it, right, like that. It's still not there. Maybe like that, okay? Like that. So this angle here, you see, it's around 25, probably less than that. Yeah, it should actually be like 24. Because, ooh, negative 24. There you go. negative 24.5. Okay. So I have something like this, right? So that's my actual like rotation angle. And then my shear angle will be the same. I'll make that like 24. Negative 24. You see? So they basically match. Negative 24, 24. You see? So that I have this kind of going in the same orientation as my drawing. You don't have to do that. It's a little graphic. It can be a little gimmicky, but I like doing that because it just makes things really consistent, right? And so that's how I get these oriented like that, right? And so, and I'll show you the final export. Final export is like super clean. And the same thing with the lines, you know, this is going to be the same angle of the lines. That's all. And so that's how so you see, like, I have this like this huge assembly drawing, and then down here, right? So it looks like one big drawing, right? Let me go here like that. Okay. So just imagine maybe you're for a studio project, you can have this pinned up as like one panel, and then next to it can be like a panel of like renderings and like colored plans. So like maybe this is the technical side of it, like the nerdy side to show that, you know, you actually really thought about this in detail, and the right side's more about like the narrative and the story. And I'll make other videos about like layouts and things like that. But, you know, this will look fantastic for studio project competitions. It'll look great for, you know, maybe clients where you want to show them how things come together so they can understand how their designs work. So yeah, I find it's really helpful. And again, this is all from one drawing. I'm going to show you the final export though. So I export this. You can export it as a PDF, like a press quality PDF. I like to export drawings like this as like very high quality PNGs or TIFFs or JPEGs. That's what I like to do. The reason why I do that is because I just want to flatten all of my line work. That's why. I just like to have things flattened. You don't have to do that. You can have it as a PDF, but what I'm about to show you is actually a JPEG that's exported at 300 dpi, okay? Okay, so here's the final export, right? And you see, again, this is like a 3 foot by like 5.5 foot long board, I think. I don't know. But, you know, I have like nice white space too. The white space is very forgiving. It's allowing room to breathe. I made these curves cornered just because it gives a little bit more relief. Everything is like so sharp, right? Kind of harsh. So if I zoom in, like now I'm about to zoom in on this thing. You see? I'm just zoomed in maybe like 52% right now. Again, this sheet is massive. This is a 300 dpi sheet, and I'm on my screen that's like 4K 32-inch screen. So I'm zoomed in a lot right now, and it still is pretty high quality if you ask me. So, you know, this is an aerial view. You see the quality is really good, really sharp. See? And again, I'm zoomed in, and see, I would say my own critique, like this wood grain, too dense. It's hard to read in my opinion. But again, I have my roof over this with the striations of the roof. So that kind of makes it a little bit more dense, but I would have made this a little bit wider, you know, because this is a little too packed. Now this is it without the roof. You see? It's a little bit more forgiving, but again, I would say this is a little too dense. I would have widened out the grain because it's a little too packed, in my opinion. I'm just critiquing my own work just so that you understand how to look at your own work and stuff, right? So again, this is the view like this, and then this is the post detail. You see? And then for the exploded, you know, see all the lines read great. Again, remember, this is not a hatch. This is a material. And you see how there's like breaks in the material? It's no big deal. No one will ever notice this stuff. It's not a big deal. This is all like for making things just read representationally. There's that. Again, this is zoomed in on a 4K screen at like 32 inches. So just imagine, you know, so this is literally zoomed in the full width of an actual sheet, right? Even more. So this I'm zoomed in more than the actual size the drawings will be printed at. So you see this again, wood grain a little bit wider. Make the wood grain a little bit wider. That's what I would have done. Same thing here. Maybe it's a little too packed. And like how I showed you about texture mapping, that's how you edit it. But it still reads as wood grain. In my opinion, reads as wood grain. You know? And so that's why, again, we do that slight transparency for material setting so you can see things going through. Okay? I did a mistake, though. Again, there should have been circles here because you're sewing through here. Or actually here. There should have been. So like in reality, just this is off topic, but like in reality, this piece, right, will notch into here like that, right? So, or excuse me, will notch into this right here. So you would see fastener holes, like 3 of them. I can draw this correctly or more accurately, right? You'd see 3 going through here. I missed that. It's a big no-no. silly mistake, but I mean, no one will notice, right? Like that. So that's about it. I mean, I hope you found this helpful. Again, I think this is great for presentations. Again, like if you want to show a board that's more technical, like one sheet board is technical, and another board that's more narrative design driven, that's like very powerful because you're showing how you think about both the narrative and actual like assembly of architectural. You know, they use the word tectonics a lot. It's a fancy word. You don't need to use it, but like, you know, how things work together and come together, right? So this is like a great way of doing that. All right, I hope you found this helpful. Please like and subscribe because I really want this channel to grow. Again, all this content's for free. I really want people to have access to this content. And please spread the word and share this with as many people as possible just to help the channel grow. All right, thank you.